Oh my god, another video on Title II? Yes it is, and you guys are going to want to watch this one. There's a problem in America. The ISPs are so big and the competition is so small that they're now able to mess with the traffic, like slowing down YouTube, slowing down Netflix and that sort of thing, and you guys can't really do anything about it. So the FCC sued them, but since they're not classified as, Title II, the FCC really can't do anything, and they lost. Now, we have, even President Obama, he hasn't done many awesome things, but he did come out and say, hey, we probably should keep the internet open and we probably should reclassify under Title II. So all these things have happened. But we're seeing some backlash now from most of the big ISPs, but also some of the technology companies. And there was a large letter we talked about on the tech, and just a ton of technology companies are very anti-Title II. They're saying it's going to be terrible for the internet. Speeds are going to be slower. Prices are going to go sky high. Investments are going to cease. So there's a lot of misinformation floating around out there. And then we're seeing stuff like this. This is right here, one of the comments on our video. People are eating up the misinformation and they're quoting it. They're posting it on our videos. It's all over Reddit. People are coming to the defense of their favorite technology companies and telling us that we're idiots for supporting Title II. We're here to tell you that we've done our homework. You guys should do it too. But you can start right now by looking at some of the stuff that we are going to talk about. So Wendell, for everyone out there who has no idea what Title II is, fill them in. What is Title II?
It's not inaccurate to say that Title II was sort of developed in a time, before the internet really exploded or blah, blah, blah. Title II refers to a section of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. If you've watched this before, you've probably heard us talk about that. We've actually got another video on that. You should go watch that. The 96 Telecommunications Act was signed into law in February 96, imagine that. It sort of specifies the different types of information services like telephone services and internet services and information services. And at the time it was signed in 96, DSL was actually a Title II service.
So you're telling me that there was already internet that was under the rules of Title II? Surely that must have destroyed the internet, and surely no one must have invested, and surely there was no infrastructure, upgrades, right?
Well, it turns out the reality of that, no, it actually had the opposite effect. One of the things in the 96 Telecommunications Act was opening up local infrastructure to multiple competing companies. And arguably, that's one of the reasons that DSL really took off. The context of the internet in 96 is the internet was getting to be a really big thing, but most people had dial-up. You literally dialed the number of the ISP, and then your computer talked to their computers. It occupied the phone line. You couldn't use the phone line for voice while you were using it for an ISP. A lot of people actually had two phone lines at home. They have a phone line for voice calls, and they would have a phone line for internet calls. And sometimes one for fax, yeah. The telephone companies were actually kind of afraid that DSL, which operated on a different set of frequencies on the same line, so you could do voice and data on the same line, would cannibalize their sales. It's like, everybody in America has a phone line. Pretty soon everybody in America is going to have two phone lines. It's going to be really good for us. We don't know if we want to roll out DSL. And so opening up the local infrastructure let DSL explode. And that's not just us saying that, that's a bunch of researchers saying that, and you should go read the article.
And now we're kind of seeing the same thing, where they don't want to upgrade. They're not being forced to upgrade. They're getting tons of subsidies from the government, but they're kind of sitting on it all. What they want to do right now is keep it the way it is, so that you have to have cable TV to watch your, watch your normal programs, and you have to have internet separately, two different packages. If the internet was upgraded to modern standards, it would be so fast we would really have no need for the current television. The other thing that they're doing, they're sitting on all this money, and instead of using it to upgrade like they're supposed to, this is our money, by the way, like money out of our pockets that's going to them to upgrade the internet. Well, instead of doing the upgrades, what they're doing is they're buying each other and consolidating, and competition is getting even smaller. Now, one of the biggest arguments from this, and we'll address this, is that if we reclassify under Title II, it will make it way more difficult for small mom and pop ISPs to exist. And that is completely untrue for several different reasons. Wendell, I'll let you jump in on that one.
Well, it turns out that a lot of mom and pop ISPs are already using Title II subsidies in order to fund their operation. Now, if we get in the Wayback Machine again, and we talk about the context of Title II as it was in 1999, 2000, 2001, basically until August of 2006, we'll get to that in a minute, mom and pop ISPs could actually rent at a reasonable rate the access to the local infrastructure from the phone companies. And that is documented fact as to what led to the explosion of DSL, because the Bell companies, the AT&T phone companies, didn't really want to do DSL because of the whole multiple phone line thing. But local companies in the local loop could do that. They could broker a high-speed business connection, get their own DSL equipment, and then deploy that to consumers. And that is exactly what happened in a large part of America. And so today, Title II, something happened. The FCC allowed providers to classify certain types of their services as Title I in 2006. And so effectively that cut off access for smaller ISPs to the local infrastructure. And that's also what led to a lot of consolidation. And that's sort of out of the scope of this video to get into that, but know that that's what happened. The local ISPs that survived are typically the ones that ran their own infrastructure. And they're not the ones that are really leasing their connectivity from the local. They ran their own lines on the poles, they did their own stuff like that. And so like the ISPs in rural areas have run their own infrastructure, and they survive today, and they get subsidies today on the telephone services. And so when we talk about Title II, Verizon has Title II services and they collect subsidies. AT&T has Title II services and they collect subsidies from the government on that. And
millions and millions of dollars.
And that runs over the same infrastructure. And so we have another article that's like, well, Title II suits these companies just fine when they're getting, federal handouts for that. Why is it, why does this happen? With AT&T, the same infrastructure that carries your phone line is the same infrastructure that carries your DSL. And so they get money to upgrade that infrastructure to fiber. Part of the 96 Telecommunications Act was a promise of fiber optic internet connectivity. That's never been realized, but that's not even what we're talking about here.
So up until 2006, DSL services were classified under Title II, and we had tons of little mom and pop DSL companies all over the place. It was almost just like your long distance. When you wanted to get DSL, you had a choice of which DSL company you wanted to use with your existing infrastructure. But in 2006, all the different ISPs got together, the big ones that is, and they were like, you know what, let's lobby the FCC because we don't like this Title II thing for our internet. Let's get them to reclassify it from an essential service under Title II to Title I, which is it's an information service. So the FCC said, all right, your internet stuff can be an information service, whatever, but phone lines still Title II. It's essential. Everyone needs phone lines. So they did. They reclassified it, and guess what happened to all those little mom and pop DSL companies? Dead, gone.
Well, they were gone because they didn't have access to the infrastructure anymore. Under Title I, the phone companies didn't have to sell local access anymore. They didn't have to be, the competitive local exchange carrier program was basically done away with. And so, AT&T basically inherited that market. And that's pretty much where DSL has stayed. They rolled out 6 meg DSL. Today, on a huge amount of America, they still only have 6 meg DSL. They're only just barely starting to maybe think about upgrading, maybe, sort of, kind of. And so, with that, the ISPs told the FCC, it's like, we really need this so that we can invest and we can do all this stuff. It was the same old story that they had in 96. So I was like, all right, you guys, we'll let you do that. We'll see what happened. And if we look at the data, again, go back to the graph, the annual Bell Company expenditures were down $2 billion in inflation-adjusted terms from their peak in the last year of Title II's application. So Title II was done away with, and they turned off all their investment immediately. Bell Company revenues have headed in the other direction, though. They've increased by $7 billion since the dismantling of Title II, even managing to grow during the worst part of the 2008-2009 recession. So why do we say that? Well, we say that because the 2008-2009 recession, people that had discretionary spending, meaning like if they had a choice, there was less spending. But the spending on these telecommunication services weren't really affected under Title I. That, to me, suggests that those are essential services like a telephone line, and it's a pretty strong indicator. And so then we jump ahead to the 2010 FCC Open Internet Order.
The FCC came out and said, listen, things are getting a little bit out of hand. We need you guys to do 3 simple things. Can you do that for us? And here are the 3 simple things. We need transparency. And they need transparency in the way that they run and manage their networks. I guess that's kind of redundant to say run and manage, but you guys get the idea.
Transparent to the consumers.
Right. They wanted no blocking. You know, that's to say, like, pretty much net neutrality. You're not supposed to block stuff that's lawful on the internet. You don't block that. And then they wanted no unreasonable discrimination, which would be no internet fast lanes, essentially. And then Verizon's like, well, FCC, we're Title I. You can't tell us what to do. And they sued, went to court, and they won. But the interesting thing in court here is that the judge, Lawrence H. Silberman, said in court that it was his opinion that, well, you know, Verizon wins this because they're Title I, not because they're doing the right thing, really. But what the FCC should probably look into doing is reclassifying them under Title II so that we wouldn't have this kind of nonsense anymore. And he even advised that that's probably the step that they should take. So while the judge sided with Verizon, for obvious reasons, because Verizon was correct, because they're Title I. So really, it's all the FCC's fault for reclassifying them under Title I in the first place. Now, it's in Verizon's interest to stay Title I. Correct. It's in the other ISP's interest to stay under Title I because it's going to help remove competition. It's going to be very bad for us. It's going to make our prices continue to go up. And it's also going to be good for a number of the tech companies that work with these ISPs. That's why they're all against Title II, because they're freaking greedy. They don't really care about the end users. They don't really care about our experience. They care about they care about whatever's going to put the most money in their pockets the fastest. And so that is why this stuff is happening. And it makes no sense to me that people out there on the internet are coming to their defense because now their favorite technology company is against Title II. So now they are too, without doing any research. That's really ignorant, guys. Now, the one thing I have not driven home yet is competition. We talked about it just a little bit. The mom and pop ISPs. It's not going to be that different for them. I mean, currently, all throughout New England right now, we're seeing in Maine and Vermont, tons of small ISPs getting huge grants from the government to lay fiber. That's not really going to change at all under Title II.
One of the pieces that we think is corporate fluff that's been put out on this suggests that a better approach, rather than reclassifying, is to just write a law that says that the communications companies can have access to the local infrastructure so they can do something competitive. Well, it's funny because that was exactly the premise of the 96 Telecommunications Act. It was an unbundling of infrastructure from services. But the companies that we're talking about today were the very companies that fought that tooth and nail. So I don't really see that as being particularly effective.
Guys, the bottom line is this. Title II may not be the magic medicine, but under Title I, they have behaved like complete sociopaths. The basic three things here are, transparency, no blocking, and no unreasonable discrimination. They will not agree to those things. Under Title II, they'll be more forced to do those things. And yeah, some of the provisions under Title II can be somewhat onerous, but you know what? Tom Wheeler, crazy Tom Wheeler, who is always on their side, he looks at them and he's like, guys, you guys are being a little bit greedy. I mean, could you maybe clean a little bit of the blood off, the side of your mouth a little bit, just have it dripping on your fangs instead of on the side of your mouth? He's been acting kind of that way. I don't trust Tom Wheeler as far as I could sling a piano, but I'm going to go back and read a quote here from Tom Wheeler. This says, for 20 years, Verizon Wireless, AT&T Wireless, and all the wireless carriers have been living under Title II with appropriate forbearance. There's the word, appropriate forbearance. Again, I don't trust him, but appropriate forbearance can make all this work. And they've been able to raise and invest hundreds of billions of dollars and build a mobile network that is the envy of the world. Well, right now, maybe it is 4G is not really a thing in most parts of the world. So he is kind of right there. And they did roll out some crazy infrastructure. We're not seeing the same kind of things, rolled out. The only companies that are doing it, companies like Google Fiber, and then a whole bunch of small mom and pop ISPs that could they could really survive. They could do just fine under Title II with appropriate forbearance. And I think they would get that. And I think a lot of the local governments would step in. So there are some ifs in here, but it's a hell of a lot better than Title I. And whenever these major companies are so against something, and they are so against three simple principles, those three principles again, transparency, blocking, and unreasonable discrimination, they're against those three simple principles. They've got to have something up their sleeve.
In the court case with Verizon and Comcast, with those three simple principles, these ISPs could not agree to operate that way. What does that tell you about their agenda? It does not matter that Title II has ridiculous, onerous provisions. Tom Wheeler is not going to enforce that. If you think that he is, you are crazy. He is going to really, really put on the kid gloves with this, even if they're reclassified as Title II. The reality, though, is that we, as citizens, we really ought to have our torches and pitchforks, because these companies have been paid a lot of money. They are still paid under Title II for their telephone services, enormous subsidies to upgrade their infrastructure. And guess what? The infrastructure that carries phone lines carries internet too. And so we've already paid for massive upgrades well beyond what they've actually deployed. And for these ISPs to say we're not going to invest in our infrastructure until, you know, this whole Title I, Title II thing is worked out I'm so incensed by that it's like, all right, we're going to pull federal subsidies then. All your federal funding, all your federal subsidies that you get right now under Title II, gone tomorrow. Let's you know, it's like, let's bring it on, boys, bring it on. Let's see how you behave, because AT&T got $100 million for that, like last year, the year before. Let's see how they do without that. I mean, come on, bring it on. Not only that, small ISPs, hey, small ISPs, here we've got $100 million of subsidies for you. We actually, it was 380 some in total, the total pot, but AT&T took 100 million of it. So for mom and pop ISPs, let's talk about job creation. Giving that kind of money to small ISPs would be completely insane, just completely insane.
And the last thing that we've left out of this entire thing, a better internet would be good for all of us. It would be good for all of our businesses. There would be sort of an explosion. So guys, it's really what's good for us. And Title I ain't really working out for us. So before you guys continue to parrot nonsense that you've heard, and you know, before you guys yell about us on the internet and jump on Reddit and do the whole hive-minded thing where you guys just repeat each other and repeat what your favorite technology company said in that letter, do some real research, look at some charts, look at the way it used to be. We have, you know, there's a track record that we can look back at. So
Google
do that, do your homework.
Google the $400 billion ripoff, read that. And if you are not about to have a heart attack or an aneurysm with rage after reading that, then email me. Because one of the things that we as taxpayers have paid for in the whole infrastructure thing, we've paid for our libraries and schools to be rewired with fiber 9 times. And I'm sure that if you're familiar with your local school, you know that it's got terrible internet. So
there it is, the $400 billion broadband scandal. So I think I'm pretty much done talking. I just kind of had to make this video because I was getting sick of the misinformation, and I was getting sick of hearing my peers on the internet parrot this nonsense. So guys, learn stuff. That's the end. I'm done.
It's like, we're just a couple of guys, but this has already been through the court system, and the judicial branch said, yeah, just reclassify them and give them forbearance, and you know, use forbearance to decide what they do. It's already been through the court system. We don't have to think about this. It's not a debate. This has already happened.
Education is power. Don't be a hive mind. Just close the video. Thanks for being awesome, everybody who's awesome. And if you suck, be awesome.